I think you all probably know of or know Richard Parrish. He operates a studio in Bozeman, Montana, but he also teaches all around the world. He's I think, one of the best known fused glass artists in the U.S., and he's known all over the world. So we're really appreciative that he's giving us his time today. So, Richard, please take it away.
Okay. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. I'm honored to be invited to speak to you and to talk to you about my work. Um, Seeing so many familiar faces and names, I'm sure that some of what I'm going to show and talk about will be familiar, especially if you've taken classes from me, which I'm seeing a lot of people who have. So I do apologize for repetition or for repeat, but I think it will be in a little bit different vein than you may have seen it before. So I'm going to do this as a PowerPoint. So before any presentation, I have to do a little contemplation. And this is a great place for it. I wish I could go here more often. This is actually at Glenstone in Potomac, Maryland. And this is a bench by one of my favorite artists, Martin Purrier. The other thing that you need to do before presentation is you need to go visit the sisters of the presentation. Um, and I guess this is a real place according to this sign. Sometime I'm actually going to have to do that. So I've titled this talk as In Particular Places at Critical Times, because I have been fortunate, very fortunate to go places all over the world and to happen to be at the right place at the right time, it seems to me. I've met amazing people, and I owe a lot of my whole practice and my whole career in glass to a lot of different people, some of whom I will mention as we go along. So this is the view from my studio in Montana, one in the late summer on the left and one in the winter. It's a beautiful view. Bozeman is in a kind of a round valley, a huge round valley. It's surrounded by seven mountain ranges. So it's a pretty spectacular landscape. And I try not to become jaded, and I try to always remember where I'm at and where I'm from. So I grew up on a farm in Idaho. This was our house. Not really. I'm just kidding. But this is what it looked like in the wintertime. This is when we had real winter. So here I am. I'm out sitting in the field. I'm not out standing in my field yet, but hopefully someday I will be outstanding in my field. The middle picture, here I am, the not so happy cowboy, and on the right, the already insolent artist type at a very young age. My grandmother Parrish was living on the farm where I grew up. She actually ran the farm after her husband died, left her the farm and seven kids at a relatively young age. So she was a pretty amazing woman. When my father took over the farm, she started painting, and she started me painting when I was 8 years old. And I still hear her saying to me, "Don't put the horizon line in the middle of the painting." So that was my first lesson in composition and design, I guess. My undergraduate education was at the University of Idaho, and I studied architecture because my high school counselor told me that I couldn't make a living as an artist, so I should be an architect. So I did study architecture, but I took a lot of art classes, including painting and ceramics. After undergraduate school, I I went to work in an architecture office. I worked in Spokane, Washington, and then I moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and lived there for 5 years. Worked in a firm there. Did a number of award-winning projects, but probably the thing that I did that has had the most impact on my life was I took a weekend workshop in fused glass, and that was in 1985. So that was a long time ago. Um, I took it on a whim. Some friends said, "Oh, let's take this," and I said, "Well, sure, that sounds fine." And by the end of the weekend, I was hooked. But I didn't really get to do anything for about 10 years until I went to graduate school and then kind of resettled my life. So after 9 years in architectural practice, I went to graduate school and I chose Cranbrook Academy of Art, which is 15 miles out from the center of Detroit in one of the wealthiest suburbs in the United States. Um, but I chose Cranbrook because it had the most radical architecture program in the country at the time. But it was also interdisciplinary with all of the art, all of the arts, or fine arts, painting, sculpture, ceramics, metalwork, and so on and so forth, as well as architecture. So I got a little bit of everything by going there. And the campus was spectacularly beautiful, designed by the Finnish architect Elio Saarinen, whose son, Eero Saarinen, you may know of, especially in the DC area, because he designed the Dulles Airport. He also designed the St. Louis Arch, amongst other projects. So my interest at Cranbrook was this idea of making. I felt like it was missing in architecture, and I was really interested in the idea of making with your hands, making real things with real materials. And in the architecture program, we didn't make buildings. We made things that spoke about sort of the essence of architecture, if you will. So my concern was making and meaning. I came back to um, Montana and Idaho after graduate school just to visit, and I had a much deeper appreciation of the landscape, the agricultural landscape, and of the places that I had grown up uh, at that time. So I ended up getting a teaching position at Montana State University. And it was at the perfect place. It was back in the Intermountain West, which was home to me. And it was an architecture position, which had been my whole career path, was to get an architecture position. What I didn't realize was that while I would love teaching, I did not really like academia very well. So after 8 years, I left academia, went back into architectural practice. Um, but I digress. This is a photograph from Yellowstone National Park, and I grew up near Yellowstone National Park. We would go for a Sunday drive to Yellowstone, to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Yellowstone Park. And I just, as a little kid, you just assume that everybody lives in the same kind of place you do. That was my worldview. Well, of course, now I understand how special it was to grow up near there. And I still live near Yellowstone National Park, and we can still go for a day drive, but it's a long, long day to do the park drive. But I'm fascinated by Yellowstone Park, by the landscape, by the textures, the colors. And while I don't think I knowingly integrate that into my work, I think it shows up or influences my work pretty significantly. Both the vastness of the landscape and the rugged, almost violent violence of the features in the park. Growing up, Craters of the Moon National Monument was north of the farm. where I grew up. And so, again, a fascination with the colors, the textures, and just the violence that formed that landscape. I've said violence a couple of times now, and I'm not really into that, but I am into what the landscape, these rugged, really unusual landscapes, have to offer. From the farm where I grew up, looking north, on the horizon, you could see this big butte. On the left is an aerial view of it, and on the right, you see the butte. And even as a little kid, I was fascinated, and I thought, I always wondered what would happen if you could cut that and lift it up. What would the ground look like? What did it look like underneath or beneath the surface of this place? So I just want to say making is essential to my being, and that's why I do what I do, because I love to make things. As a little kid, I was fascinated with maps, and I would make maps in the dirt and then later on drawing them. Maps were these sort of unknown places. It was a place of dreams, or they were places of dreams, and I was just I am still fascinated by a map. Not so much by Google Maps, but by drawn maps in particular. So when I got to Bozeman in 1992 and had a faculty position, I applied for a grant, a creativity grant, and got it. And so I bought a kiln and I bought some bullseye glass. And I bought bullseye glass because my 3 pages of notes from that weekend workshop in Anchorage said bullseye glass. So that's what I did. And I didn't have any resources to learn. There were really no classes that were readily available, especially living in Montana. It wasn't the online presence or anything. So I learned by making a lot of mistakes. I just would try things. I'd say, well, what if I do this or what if I do that? And then I'd try it, and then I'd have either a success or more likely a massive failure. But I always learned. And so one of the first pieces, one of the early pieces was this map of Babylon. And again, there were a lot of problems with it. I mean, if you could really see it up close, you'd say, "Oh, I can't believe you really did that, Richard. You should know that wasn't compatible." But I got an image and I learned. So I went on. I started doing figure drawings and then overlaying on the figures these lines and geometries, and they started sort of looking like maps in a way, a little different kind of map. Um, these were very important to me at the time, very personal, because I was going through a time in my life where I was getting a divorce and I was coming to terms with being a gay man. And so the artwork is really what got me through it, and got me through all the tough parts of that. And my therapist loved to look at my artwork and then talk about it. And she named this series the Heroic Journey series. I certainly didn't feel like a hero at the time, but the work kind of spoke to what I was feeling. In 2004, I took a class with Steve Klein. It was called One Piece, Two Elements, Three Colors. And the colors were black, white, and clear. That's what we had to work with in glass. I pulled out these diagrams and rough sketches from my sketchbook that had to do with this idea of what's beneath the surface. And that was really what I worked on in the workshop. I went back to this idea of the butte and what happens if you cut it off and what does it look like? Because what we see and what really exists are two vastly different things. So I've just have for a long time have been intrigued with this idea, what's beneath the surface? What's beneath the surface of the earth? What's beneath the surface of the person? Um, what's beneath the surface of the glass? So it led to some investigations. These were in the class, these were just tests, certainly not anywhere near finished work. But Lonnie McGregor, one of the partners in Bullseye Glass, and she was the director of the Bullseye Gallery that existed at the time. She came by our class during the reviews and saw these, and she offered me a show, a solo exhibition at the gallery. And I was petrified because it's like you don't say no to something like that. So here it was, a particular person at a particular time, and I had the exhibition 2 years after that, and I made a lot of new work, a lot of, well, and this was the first piece after the class. This is a series of 9 panels, each of them about 9 inches by 13 inches. And somebody said, well, you should submit it for the Corning Museum of Glass New Glass Review. And I said, yeah, right. But I did it and I got it. I got in and I thought, well, this is really cool. I'm never going to apply again because that way I can say I got 100%. But I do have my file full of rejections from later years. So I continued to make work for the show. Um, and I kind of became obsessed with this idea of removing layers of glass from the surface from these layered blocks that I would cast into fiber paper molds, and just to see what the patterns would turn out to be like and what the glass would look like. And so the whole idea of surface removal uh, revealed what's beneath the surface of the glass. So it was really a direct correlation between idea and the technique. While I was making these, I was just getting into it, and Lonnie called me one day to see how I was doing, and I said, I don't think I can do the show. I said, I don't have enough glass and to make nearly enough work, and I can't afford to buy the glass. And she said, well, that's no problem. We'll send you a crate of glass and you can pay for it with sales at the show. And which was a good thing to hear because that meant that she thought I was going to sell something in the show. And it turned out I got there and 3 pieces were already sold. I showed up, I sent everything over, it was hung, and then I went over for the show opening. 3 pieces were sold, and I found out later that Lonnie had bought all 3 of those. So it's I owe an awful lot to Bullseye and to Lonnie McGregor, as well as to Steve Klein. So after that class, soon after that, Steve had asked me to be his teaching assistant at Pilchuck, and then to join him to develop these professional artists in residence programs, which we've done at Pilchuck, we've done them in Berlevåg, Norway, Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, and at Northlands Creative Glass in Leibster in Scotland. A couple of the early residencies that we did in Scotland, I met Carlin Sutherland. Carlin had grown up in Leibster, where Northlands was, and was working on her doctorate in architecture. So we would have these great conversations about architecture and about glass and about place. And that led to an invitation for a show of the 2 of us at the Bullseye Gallery, and it was called Conversations. Um, and we did things like send these sketchbooks back and forth to each other. She was in Scotland and I was in Bozeman. We would draw in them and then send them back and forth. We would do online conversations. Um, and I visited Scotland a couple of times as we were making the work for the show. So just a couple of pieces from that show. This is a place called Dunby Strath, which is near Leicester, and I just I liked the aerial view. I liked the composition of the different forms, the buildings, the ruins, and on the right is the finished piece that I made from that place. Another place that I was just fascinated with was called Knibster Brock. And Brocks were an Iron Age fortress-like structure that existed in a lot of them in Scotland, some in Ireland, some in the Orkney Islands. This is the ruins of one near where we were at Leicester. The upper left image, you can see that donut shape, and that's the Brock. And then you can see on the lower left what's left of it. So I made this piece, which is 48 inches in diameter, and it's a wall-mounted piece. It's actually made in four sections. And it was the biggest and the piece with the most impact that I had ever made up until that time, and probably still is one of the biggest and the best. In 2016, I was invited to have a show in Corning, New York, at the Rockwell Museum. The Rockwell Museum had a great collection of Western art, the big landscapes, the bronze horses, the bronze cowboys and Indians, and so on. And they wanted to bring it more current. They wanted to do a show of that was sort of in the vein of Western art, if you will, but contemporary Western art. And so I was invited, and I made 22 new pieces in over the course of 1 year, and showed them there. And it was I was really thrilled with the show. I went on to show at a couple of the Bullseye Research Centers and the Bullseye Gallery in Portland. Um, and one of the pieces, which I'll show you in a minute, ended up in Lonnie McGregor's house even. So Lonnie's been a big supporter. But that show was mostly based on images that I took flying with my friend Chris, who had this little red airplane. And we would fly over the Madison River Valley, which is the valley to the west of where I live, and then over the Gallatin Valley, where I live now. And the Gallatin River and the Madison River and then the Jefferson River all come together, and they form the headwaters of the Missouri River about 30 miles from Bozeman. So this was one piece. It was from an iPhone photo on the left of these creeks. And I was fascinated by the meandering lines. And then in the middle is a Google Earth image of that. And then on the right is the piece that I made. And it was purchased by the Rockwell Museum for their permanent collection. And the curator at the time um, called my work something to the effect of it being a continuation of the American landscape tradition. So I thought, wow, that's more than I would say about it. So it's really fascinating to hear what other people say about your work. You can see here how I'm making it. I make fiber paper molds in bas relief, and then in this case, I sifted powder on it. Um, in different colors and manipulated it with water, the powder with water, with brushes, built it all up. Remember that I'm really working backwards. So the first thing I put down is the front of the piece, and I keep adding and adding. And so I'm sort of working blind, which I guess is a good excuse if it doesn't turn out, but it did. Another piece bend that was just inspired by the bending and meandering of the Gallatin River near Bozeman that we saw when we were flying. You see these fields all over the United States and elsewhere, fields that are they're irrigated with a center pivot system, so they create the circles. Usually it's a really precise grid, and the circles are all the same size. But here was this place where they were different sizes and shapes, and so I decided I was going to make each one of those into a finished bas relief piece. Um, these were all, well, they were 12 by 15 and 12 by 12. And I initially thought that they would be just studies for much larger pieces, but I became enamored with that 12-inch dimension. And so I did them all in that manner. Here's three of them. So this piece in the same series for the same show is called Erosion. And with this idea of trying to make things with a technique that's very similar to the idea, I would apply the water to the fiber paper, and then I would actually run water through the powder um, after I applied a fair amount of powder, and I just run the water through it, so it was eroding the powder, much the same way that dirt is eroded or soil is eroded as it comes down the hills. Another one in the series. This is one of the layered pieces where I ground off areas to expose the turquoise and midnight blue colors. Basalt Rift was actually inspired by the craters of the moon in Idaho, so I went a little further afield for this piece. But the green sort of symbolized and alluded to the little bits of vegetation that are trying to take hold in those lava fields. And then the red alludes to the fire that was there at one time. And divide alludes to both the continental divide, which is very near here, and it alludes to the divide in this country, the political and social divide, which at the time that I made this was nothing compared to what it is these days. So it was, I guess, somewhat prophetic to make this piece. A couple of pieces from a show called Tipping Point. Artists addressed climate change. This one called On the Edge, really about the fires and about us being on the edge of the cliff, if you will, when it comes to climate change. And this one was called Slide. It's about the idea of landslides and what comes after the fires, oftentimes. Insulatus was my COVID piece. The title Insulatus comes from isolated, um, and then from the Latin insulatus, which literally means island. Um, Again, an interest in the anthropomorphic relationship between the human body and maps. I think the human body form starts to become much more apparent in this piece than it was in the early pieces that I did. But in many of the pieces that I've made over the years, the human body is in there in some manner. Oftentimes it's so obscured by the abstraction that you don't see it. Um, Gao was a commission for a man who works for the United Nations who spent quite a bit of time in the city of Gao in Mali along the Niger River. And it's a pretty large piece, 42 inches in each dimension. and done in 3 panels. So my studio practice is comprised basically of 4 things: the teaching, the gallery works of the mapping or bas relief work, and the gallery works of the tapestry work, which most of you are familiar with, and then architectural glass and commission work. So I'll show you a couple of commissions. I thought I'd show you a couple of commissions. This is one in Denver. It was for the new Children's Hospital, or it was new at the time. This wall in the chapel had already been designed by the architect, and so the openings were given, and I was to make the glass to go into those, and so I did the bas relief with the ground off layers, but I did almost all transparent glass. And before I did the glass work, the chaplain for the chapel was really unhappy with the architects. He really did not like the chapel that was being designed for him. But he was really thrilled with the glass work and liked the chapel much more. So I think I was a great success in that project. This is in Bozeman. This is in our library. It's 11 of these wave-shaped panels. And these are all suspended by cables so they can move a little bit in the slight air currents that are in a space like that. And they just float over the circulation desk. I really wanted this commission. It was open, an open competition, and so I had to do the submittal and everything to get it. And I put a lot of time and effort into it because I wanted it so bad. And their budget was really low, so I didn't make any money on this. I figure it's my donation to the library. But I still hear comments from people who go into the library for the first time and see it. And then this is a commission that Steve Klein, notice Steve Klein keeps coming back. Um, he's my partner in crime, my mentor, my colleague, my good friend. This is at the Temple Beth Shalom in Santa Ana, California. It's these windows between the congregation or the worship area and a public reception zone. And the colors for the windows for the glass were given by the rabbi, and they were very specific about what those colors needed to be. So, for example, the purple was not a standard bullseye color. So Steve and I did a lot of tests on layering colors to get the right colors to make the purple. Same thing with the red, um, and the turquoise or aqua color, and then the gold and yellow color. They also were quite specific about they wanted us to somehow integrate imagery of these ancient synagogues that were very important to that particular congregation or that particular synagogue that we were working for. So we ended up doing these textured panels. They were heavily textured on one side to match the Jerusalem stone that's in the wall. And then on the smooth side, we screen printed with black powder the images of all of these synagogues. And then a very recent commission. This is for a chandelier for a private residence in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is 45 inches in diameter, this bowl, and I did not make it in my studio. It was made at Fire Art Studios in Portland. They had this mold that you see on the left, and it's in their big kiln, which is 10 foot by 10 foot. Um, I I would I would love to have a kiln like that, but I'm not sure I would know what to do with it for the rest of the year. So anyway, they did the fabrication for me. I did all the tapestry work, and then it was the final assembly and fusing and slumping was done over there. And then here you see it hanging in the space. So I'm thrilled with this piece. Um, I'm not sure I'll ever see it because I don't know when I'll ever get to Tulsa, Oklahoma, um, but there it is. Um, and lastly, just a few photographs of my studio. It's a big space. It's about 1,600 square feet. It's big enough for me to teach in and to have plenty of room for classes and for the students to work. I usually only have 6 people in a class, and that's intentional just to make it really comfortable. And then I have 4 kilns that I use, 2 big Denver kilns and a Paragon CS26, and then one other. So that's my studio. But ultimately, for me, as I said, it's about making and it's about meaning. So here I am making. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's so nice to see all those pieces that you made over the years. What my question is, I know that you credit being in the right place at the right time. Um, Clearly, your talent was, what made those things happen. But I wonder, these days, where it seems like places like Northland have gone by the wayside. What kind of advice do you give to people who might be coming up as a young fused glass artist on how to sort of move from just being like a craft fair type artist to somebody who would move on to being a gallery artist?
Well, I think part of it is to intentionally put yourself in the right place. And part of that is taking classes at places like Corning or Pittsburgh Glass Center, where you'll meet really influential people. Um, there are great teachers, great visiting teachers, but for example, at Corning, you're going to meet people like Richard Whiteley and so on, and they can give you a lot of information and help guide you. It seems to me that in the glass art in general, it's moving to more of an academic kind of thing rather than the or it's moving to an academic kind of model where younger people are taking they're going to school, they're going to college and studying glass. And they don't just study fused glass or they don't just study blown glass. They study glass in general and they study all of the different ways to work with it. So what I'm seeing in younger people is if when they're doing their artwork, they're using techniques from the hot shop and from the flame shop and from the fuse the kiln forming shop and so on. So, I mean, if as a really young person, I would advise them to look at an academic program. Um, Now, I didn't really get into it until, well, I guess I was in my 30s when I took that first class, but I was in my 40s when I really started to set up a studio. Uh, and I think now when we're doing that at that, so or a lot of people are getting into it later in life as a hobby and then as something they do in retirement. So I think to move on is to, you need to sort of find your voice. You need to find what's what makes you unique and what do you love to make? I always said that my goal was to be able to make what I love to make rather than make things that I thought would sell. And I've been fortunate um, that for the most part, I've been able to do that. So,
Well, I want to open this up and see if anybody out there has any questions for Richard.
The bas relief is so different from the tapestry. What led to the
yeah.
tapestry process?
Well, they do have something in common in that they all both came from sort of my roots in the farm and tapestry started out as I was looking at fields of grain and how after the grain has cut, there's the stubble left and it's just these
Mhm.
repetitive rows of vertical lines. And so I
Mhm.
started thinking, well, how can I make something that's just repetitive rows of vertical lines? And it started out really simple, a few lines and big strips and so on. And then it just kind of evolved to the scale that it is made now. So they both kind of had that same roots, but then they diverged. My architecture background is still a big part of it. That's what gives everything there's sort of a linear quality to
Mhm.
it or a quality to it. So there's really an architectural underlaying. And I think that helps me in abstracting.
I was curious about what do you see evolving in yourself? Do you feel like you're, content to continue with this vein, or you have something else that you're being drawn to?
Well, I I've I feel like I don't really I really don't see myself having a radical departure from what I'm doing or a whole new body of work. Um, but who knows? I feel like for me, it's like this sort of small incremental kind of evolution or development. And um, I have the luxury of a little more time over the next year that I'm going to try to focus on developing some of the ideas that I've been writing down and putting in sketchbooks for years. But most of them are still sort of related to bas relief work. Um, I say all that, and then what happens usually every time I say that is I get a big commission. And so I'm often doing that, but that's
Yep.
okay
Yeah, that's
because commissions take you in new directions too. So.
mhm. Is it a commission where they say, make us something that shows that it's you, or we want you to make a thing to go here?
Well, it's kind of both. The client that commissioned the chandelier, I've done work for him for 20 years in four different homes. And so I know him and he knows me. And when it came to the chandelier, I said, well, he told me how big he wanted. And I said, so what do you think? What are you thinking color wise? And he says, well, you know me, I like a lot of color. And that was my direction. So he's been a great client in that sense. Um, I, but most clients know me and they know my work, and so they're coming to me for my work. They're not coming to me to be a fabricator, and
Okay.
I generally won't do that.
Mhm.
Won't just fabricate somebody that says, "Here's my drawing. These are the colors I want. I just want you to make it."
Mhm. Mhm.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, I remember way back when I took your class, Fear No Color, and I was really excited to see a couple of your slides. This was at Vitrum Studio in Beltsville, and you had some images that had color, like green and red, and they were like aspen leaves that you powdered around the outside, and they were in sections. Do you still have or make those? I was really impressed with that.
I haven't made those for years. And every once in a while, I think I should revisit that because they were pretty good,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that I know now that I didn't know then that I think would help me make them better. Um, but yeah,
Well,
thanks for bringing that up. I recently I was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and went to a gallery that had had some of my work for a long time. And I went to pick it up because it was just sitting there. And there was one of those pieces there. So I brought it home. So I have one in my studio.
well, good, good. I
So
still
that'll
have
inspire me.
I still have your color cards, and I was so impressed with that idea of taking each of the bullseye colors and making your own color wheel. And we did one in transparent and one in color, and then we did a grayscale, which
Okay.
I still use.
Well, good for you. Yeah.
This was what, 2006 or maybe around there?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, Judith was that was one of the very first studios that I taught at outside of my own studio.
Hmm.
So I that's another Judith is another person that was right place, right time because she really sort of sent me off on my teaching and the
Yeah,
teaching aspect of my career.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
we made a lot of samples.
Yeah, I'm big on samples.
Thank you so much for your time, Richard. It was really great to see your work and hear you speak about it.
Well,
Look
you're very
forward to
welcome.